Here we are, still journeying through the season of Lent, 40 days and 6 Sundays leading to Easter. And how's the journey so far? We're at Sunday number 4. Can't turn back now. Keep going. Got to keep going. As we've said, Lent is a time of self-reflection, but also a time of great possibility. We're invited to open ourselves to communion with God, who gives us the gift of forgiveness and new birth and transformation. And the theme that we've been exploring is what? By week 4, we know it's spiritual renovation. And renovation means this: to restore to good condition, to make new or as if new again, to repair, to reinvigorate, to refresh, to revive. And as we think about spiritual renovation, we are thinking about how God means to, or as it was said in this text, rekindle, fan into flame, restore, revive, or rebuild our souls. I'll start with a story. This last church that I served before coming to this church, CCUMC, the church I served was called Westview United Methodist Church, and it was in a small town just a couple of miles outside from downtown Pittsburgh. And they were lovely, and are lovely people, just like you. And I have to say that because some of them sometimes watch the videos, and so I can't say any bad stories about them. Wonderful people. Just like you, the church had been in the community for a very long time. The building itself had stood for some 125 years. And also, maybe this sounds familiar, like this church, the folks were concerned about being good stewards of the building. And they wanted the building also to be a welcoming place. One of the concerns that the people struggled with was what to do about the steeple. And that might sound silly to you, but try to relate it as if we were having a big discussion about our longevity gate, our big gate. It was something that marked the church and that had been there for a long time, and it was identified with this church, and so it was important to the people there. The steeple is made of wood, and over time, as things go, the wood had gotten chipped, it started to get gray and dingy looking, and it was becoming kind of an eyesore instead of what it was supposed to be, which was this emblem of marking the church and drawing people to it. Experts were called in, and the cost for repairing the steeple was somewhere in the neighborhood of $20,000. I know. And, we were like here, small church with many concerns, including the steeple, so that was a lot of money. Some people said, let's just remove the steeple. A lot of modern churches don't even have steeples, and people can find us by using Google or GPS. They don't need to see a steeple. Other people wanted to have a fundraiser to repair this steeple, and some other reasons were good. They were good. They said things like this. Some of the reasons were sentimental. They said, when I was a child, my mom would give me a quarter for the offering, and I'd walk the few blocks from my house to the church, and I would see the steeple, and that would guide my way. And that was a real story that somebody told. And somebody else had more of a theological reason. They said, the steeple points to God. And that's what we stand for. Everything we do under this roof points to God. And so we need the steeple so that people who don't even go to church might look at it and remember that this is a place of God and their relationship with God. Good reasons. Well, again, in case you find that all ridiculous, think about, if this were us and we all of a sudden, for some reason, had to replace or restore or get rid of that beautiful gate out front that kind of identifies us in this community. It would stir up some feelings, wouldn't it? But here's the truth, and I think you'll agree with me. The church can still be welcoming. It can still be a place where people learn and worship and grow and struggle and are encouraged, even if there isn't a steeple or a gate, because the church, right, is about the people inside, the people. And I think that God would still show up at Westview or CCUMC if we didn't have those things. It's not essential to being a church. In the same way, as we think about spiritual renovation, what needs attention in our souls, we can say that some things are not essential. And we've talked about this. Apathy and envy and pride, those things are not essential to our souls and to our lives. But some things are essential. Love, humility, gratitude. And this morning, our theme, which is courage. Courage is an essential part of a healthy soul, and God desires to build courage in the souls of those who are faint-hearted. In Scripture, there's several words that translate to courage. In the Hebrew, which is the language of the Old Testament, one expression for courage is the heart. It's related to heart. In the book of Amos, the author describes the bravest warriors of Israel were strong of heart. Conversely, a loss of heart can mean a loss of courage. Scripture uses terms like the heart goes out, or the heart falls, or the heart faints or fails, or the heart melts. And courage is also felt not only in the heart, but also in the knees and the hands. Gaining or losing courage were expressed with phrases like, strengthen your knees, strengthen your hands. And think about it, times when you've been afraid. That's where you feel it maybe, right? Palpitations in the heart, weakness in the knees. In the book of 2 Timothy, we get this scenario where it's like we're eavesdropping on a relationship between Paul, who's the mentor, and Timothy, who is Paul's mentee. And both Paul and Timothy were two people serving in ministry, as it's described here, in difficult circumstances. And in this scenario, Paul was oppressed by the government, he was imprisoned, and his co-workers had deserted him. He says that multiple times. This person is left, and this person is left, and I have been deserted. Timothy, on the other hand, was plagued by false teachers, who, from Paul's dialogue, we're getting one side of the story here, we understand to be false teachers who had extreme ascetic practices. They were preachers, but not practicing what they preached. They were deceivers, morally corrupt, lovers of self, money, and pleasures. They were disputers with words, breeders of quarrels, harsh, and with their language. And their influence, unfortunately, was spreading to the people. And in the midst of this environment, Timothy feels so oppressed or faint-hearted by this. He's reduced to tears, it says. He's lost his courage. He's faint-hearted. So the letter, in part, is one where we get a picture of one person reaching out for connection to another faint-hearted person who needs encouragement. And in the midst of following Jesus and serving in ministry, Paul's and Timothy's connections were both suffering. Timothy is isolated from personal relationships that have meaning. He's isolated from the church. He's isolated from society, and his courage seems to be suffering as we understand it. So this is a message for us and for anyone who may be faint-hearted among us, or anyone you know. If you've struggled to be understood in your personal relationships with family or friends, if you've come to church but somehow maybe you just still feel disconnected, if you feel like God just isn't listening to you, if you've felt this brand in your heart and in your knees, and in your mind and soul of faint-heartedness or a lack of courage, then you have something in common with Timothy. Even in his own isolation, Paul prescribes this path to build courage. The letter begins with Paul laying out the reason, the motivation for the letter. It says, for the sake of the promise of life that is Jesus Christ. So despite his imprisonment, his loneliness, this promise of life is a building block towards courage, the fact that God is with him. And then Paul reminds Timothy that he is not alone, but that he is part of a legacy. He says, with a clear conscience, as night and day, I constantly remember you in my prayers. Recalling your tears, I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. In other words, he says, you have me, you have God, and you have me. You have a friend who believes in you. And that is another building block to courage. Remember that as well, that you were loved. Then Paul goes on to say, I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice. I love that their names are lifted up here. And I'm persuaded now lives in you also. So Paul says, your identity is love and faith. Your heritage is one of love and faith, and don't you forget it in the midst of other people who are telling you otherwise. How is it for you? Think of significant people, perhaps, in your life who have helped to nurture your faith along the way. Perhaps family, or Sunday school teachers, or in your adult Sunday school, or professors, or so forth, or friends or neighbors. Who has encouraged you in your faith? Who invested in you? And when you think of that, it's another building block to courage. Paul says, I thank God whom I serve as my ancestors did. So it's not only just the people of your own family, but we too have a whole inheritance of ancestors of the faith. You can find a short list of them in Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11 recalls a long line of these ancestors, all of them giants of the faith. Noah and Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses and Gideon and David. Look them up later or Google them. They're all these stories of people persevering through very difficult circumstances. And imagine yourself as Timothy. Okay, yes, these people who now we have the stories that they're giants of the faith. We forget how they became giants of the faith through a long journey, through really relying on God. And it wasn't easy. So here's Timothy. And there isn't a Baptist church across the street or a Presbyterian church down the street or other people. There aren't franchises of the church yet. He feels all alone. And so the words of the mentor that come to him are reinforcements. You have God. You have me. You have a legacy of people who have nurtured you in the faith. And you have many people who have come before you, a testimony to God's faithfulness and promise of life. Building of courage happens when we remember our identity, when we trust God's love for us, and often, when possible, it happens best in some kind of community together as we encourage and strengthen one another. Courage, I'm going to go on out here and say, maybe you agree, is not the absence of fear. You can have courage and still be afraid at the same time. Courage is moving forward in spite of fear. In scriptures, we have all these images of courage, and a lot of them have to do with battle, being strong and courageous to fight against a foe, to go up against something bigger than yourself. David and Goliath, all these different images. And I was kind of shying away from using a battle image this morning. But there's something in that impulse of courage that is motivating or strengthening, even if you're not going into battle against a foe. Follow me? I was doing some research on the psychology of this, and there's a connection between healthy anger, rage, if you will, and courage. Heart rage, though. Courage often requires the energizing, fortifying effects of anger, healthy anger, I think, to precipitate it, to fuel it, or to sustain it. There's a famous psychologist, this doesn't come from me, Rollo May, who explains, encountering one's destiny requires strength, whether the encounter takes the form of embracing, accepting, or attacking. Constructive anger is one way of having the courage of facing destiny. This is a complex understanding of courage, isn't it? But maybe Paul says it this way. I think Peggy read it as igniting or reigniting that passion. And in the NIV text that we had here, it says, fan the flames. So perhaps that's part of it. It's a healthy, motivating passion that fuels courage. This might be corny, but to use our renovation theme, it's like letting God's Spirit work on your heating system or your cooling system, motivating you for courage. Courage is essential to being a human being. You need it every day, not just every once in a while for to conquer those big fears. You need to allow yourself, it takes courage to allow yourself to love and commit to another person. It takes courage for young people to leave their parents and forge their way on their own. Getting old, having to wear glasses, requires a little bit of courage. It takes courage to be yourself in the world. To be creative takes courage. Careers take courage. Pursuing your dreams, anything really. It takes courage to wake up each day. Also, perhaps what's interesting here is just following God takes courage. It takes courage to face God as ourselves and in our weaknesses and in our brokenness, and to leave our own selfishness to follow God's will. God desires to rebuild or renovate courage or build courage in us because we need it to be able to follow God. God doesn't always take away the source of fear. Sometimes I'm going to propose that God is the source of fear because we are challenged to follow God again and leave behind our own comforts. That's the work of spiritual renovation. To leave behind apathy, embrace passion, to leave behind envy, and embrace gratitude, to leave behind pride, and embrace humility. All of that takes courage. And God provides it for us. Paul says, for the Spirit of God doesn't make us timid. It gives us power, love, self-discipline. And we need it. Why? Because here's what Paul also says. Don't you be ashamed, and you're going to join me in the suffering. It's not going to be easy, in other words. The fear's not going to go away. People will still persecute you. You still will be challenged by following God, and you may suffer. That's why you need courage. Let God strengthen your knees. Let God reinforce your heart, and fear will recede. What I like about this, though, is it's, of course, okay, I'm convinced. We need courage. How do I get it? What I like about this letter is how it does feel like you're eavesdropping on a little personal conversation. Hebrews 11, again, lists this long line of giants of faith. But this letter is a letter to an ordinary person. Paul is, in a way, too, as the mentor, a giant of the faith. But it's a letter for ordinary people. If you think of yourself as the Timothy, for an ordinary person to remember that those have gone before you, to use that as a building block for your own courage and have faith for the everyday challenges. Finally, we can have courage because Jesus, in the face of great opposition, had courage on our behalf. Hebrews 12 says this, "Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses," people we know, the people who have come before us, "let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition." In other words, who needed so much courage, who endured so much opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Thanks be to the one who, like a skilled carpenter, takes a faint heart and reinforces it, takes our fear and strengthens us, bringing wholeness to our lives and making us fit for the good purposes of God's kingdom. Amen.